Welcome, everybody, to this session, This Writing Life, Creativity and Wellbeing in the Time of Pandemic. Very much looking forward to this evening's readings, discussion, and interaction. My name is Daniel Carey. I'm director of the Moore Institute at NUI Galway. Delighted to have seen that over 150 people have signed up for this session. So thank you for joining us. Here at the Moore Institute, we're very interested in the interaction between the arts and public discussion and creativity. So delighted to be able to participate in tonight's event. David Kelly is operating things behind the scenes. He's the Digital Humanities Manager in the Moore Institute, so thank you as ever to David. Our moderator this evening is the novelist and short story writer Mike McCormack. His stories have appeared in his collections Getting It in the Head and Forensic Songs, and he's published 3 novels, Crow's Requiem, Notes from a Coma, and Solar Bones. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. Good evening, folks, and thank you all for signing up to this session of readings and discussion. The Writing Life, Creativity and Wellbeing in the Time of Pandemic. It's probably wise to start with a brief kind of a context, an outline of the context within which this discussion takes place. On the 11th of March of this year, the World Health Organization characterized the coronavirus as a pandemic. That is, it's a disease that covers countries and continents. And on the following day, on March the 12th, which is exactly 8 months ago, this country went into lockdown. And since then, this coronavirus has pretty much dominated our public news and our private conversations. It has reshaped national health systems and economies. It has eclipsed other issues, political issues that we thought were important, things like Brexit. It has affected and inflected various events like the recent presidential election in America. So when we look back on this year, it will be known as the year of COVID. So how did we cope with it? Well, specifically, how did our writers cope with it? I'm thrilled to have 3 distinguished writers here this evening who have given this issue some thought, and I look forward to hearing them read and questioning them and talking to them. And I'm going to start with introducing them one by one. And our first man is Arnold Thomas Fanning. And Arnold Thomas Fanning's short stories, articles and essays have been published in the Dublin Review, Banshee, Crazy Horse Magazine, Gorse, The Lonely Crowd, Correspondences, an anthology to call for an end to direct provision, The Music of What Happens, the Purple House Anthology of New Writing and Elsewhere, and Mind on Fire, a memoir of madness and recovery that was published by Penguin Ireland in 2018 and shortlisted for the Wellcome Book Prize in 2019. He is presently Arts Council Writer in Residence NUIG Galway 2020. Welcome, Arnold. Next, we have Marina Benjamin. Marina Benjamin is a writer and editor who works in narrative, nonfiction, and memoir across books, essays, and journalism. Her most recent books are The Middle Pause, 2016, and Insomnia, 2018, published in the UK, US, and Australia, and translated into 8 languages. In 2020, she edited Garden Among Fires, a lockdown anthology published by Dodo Inc. She's also a senior editor of Aeon magazine and a regular life writing tutor at Arvon. Much to her relief, she has lately begun working on a new book. And finally, Doireann Ní Ghríofa. Doireann Ní Ghríofa writes both prose and poetry in both Irish and English. Her most recent book is the best-selling A Ghost in the Throat, which finds the 18th century poet Evelyn Dooney Connell haunting the life of a contemporary mother, prompting her to turn detective. Doireann is also the author of 6 critically acclaimed books of poetry, each a deepening exploration of birth and death, desire and domesticity. Awards for her writing include a Lannan Literary Fellowship from America, an Ostana Prize from Italy, a Seamus Heaney Fellowship, and the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature. Welcome to you all, folks, and thank you for taking the opportunity to come and discuss this theme. I'm going to start with you, Arnold. Arnold, is your camera up?
Yes, indeed.
How are you, Arnold?
Right,
Arnold, will you will you choose to write? Will you choose to read something for us so that we can get a flavour of what you're thinking of at this moment?
Yeah, I thought actually the most useful thing is to read something quite immediate. I'd like to say hot off the press, but this isn't actually even published. This is a work in progress. It's self-explanatory, so I'll just begin to read.
Good.
On keeping a pandemic diary. I began my diary on the 10th of March 2020 and made the last entry on the 16th of September, intending from the beginning that my documentation of the pandemic would always be a 6-month project, thinking naively that by autumn the worst would be over, that there would be some resolution to the crisis by then, that there would be, in short, a return. I now know that hope to be wrong. Throughout its writing, I was fully aware of all the things a diary could be, the many tropes and manifestations of the form. Added to this was a degree of self-consciousness brought about by the knowledge that I was writing the diary with a view to publishing it, that someday I would make extracts of the diary public so as to complete and give purpose to the project of documentation that I had begun. My diary became several things: an objective record of the state of the nation and the world I lived in as it faced the pandemic, a clinical account of my fluctuating moods as the effect of living under the pandemic bore down on me, and an expression of these moods and feelings in words, which was far from objectively rendered. It was a place to process what was on my mind, corral and deposit all my thoughts, stop them from being unruly and put them in order, take away their ability to disrupt or cause me disharmony. But it was always too a document, a record of all that I could deem significant that happened during the day, including a daily tally of the statistics of infections and deaths in the country, a task that grew increasingly morbid and distressing as the months wore on. Despite the layer of self-consciousness that remained as I wrote, there grew a struggle to find both purpose and meaning in the diary, and consequently, rather than look outwards frequently to find that meaning, I more and more often found myself looking inwards, gauging my own feelings, my own self and being at any given moment. For I was aware at a certain point that I was beginning to feel the effects of the pandemic acutely. What was getting to me throughout the time of its documentation was a growing sense of dread, manifesting itself as an acute anxiety that had no particularly apparent origin or source, but that eventually resulted in a loss of confidence at some core level, in myself and in the world around me. Mainly, the one continuing source of anxiety that I noted was the worry that there would be changes after the pandemic that would be irreversible compared to what was before it, that things would not return to normal in any foreseeable future. All this anxiety and dread, this fear, I documented diligently in the diary. Further, as the pandemic continued, with no appearance of a longed-for future without it in sight, fatigue set in as well as anxiety, a weariness born of impatience and exhaustion with all of it. This fatigue manifested itself in the diary also, as it became a more wearisome task to complete, in much the way as the days, in their sense to each other, were becoming wearisome to traverse. Many times I was left wondering, did I have anything to add to a narrative of the pandemic that was unique? Or was the very ordinary of my endeavor and the life it meant marked by its tedium, the whole point of it? At times, counting the ordinary, documenting it as if I were standing back and seeing it as if not involved, I could realize that it all actually something to be seen as unbelievable, in fact, far from ordinary. But as if contradicting this, there was a sense that because I documented events that were shared with me, they were, by their nature, of little interest to others. The reality was that everyone in the country had experienced the same high tedium, as well as the same distress and anxiety of the pandemic, the same daily grind, discomfort, awkwardness, isolation, and uncertainty that I had. That tediousness of the pandemic, despite the anxiety it caused me, had made it unwaveringly boring, and this had leaked into my journal. I felt the diary had become a source of sheer boredom, a site of tedium, but also the despair that so it became increasingly apparent that writing about the pandemic was beginning to push into areas of ennui which threatened to make the whole enterprise frustrating and futile. I began to ask myself, would there ever be a reader for such a work? Meanwhile, this self-reflection and self-consciousness was documented against a background of the terrible death toll and physical and mental debilitation inflicted by infection itself. Those narratives, which were more definitive, had all too often profound impacts. For those directly affected by the illness, their loss and grieving were real and palpable occurrences, while those not affected, the witnesses, could only be bystanders to such distressing happenings, rendering the idea of tedium and anxiety in the shade, or at the very least, scaling them back to their correct perspective. In life, fortunately, I too was a mere bystander witness and performed the same function in my diary also.
Thank you, Arnold. I have a great interest in that, because I too started a diary, and I didn't stick with it the same to the same extent that you did, or carry it out to the same extent that you did. So I just wondered, when the pandemic broke out, and when lockdown came in, because they seem to be one and the same thing in our minds in this country, and that, did you see it as an opportunity? Did you jump on it as an opportunity? Here it is. I have a theme that's going to draw me on for the next for as long as this thing happens.
Yes, that's what the self-consciousness was about that I mentioned. I mean, there was this sense of plague literature, and now we were in an era where we could join in the plague literature of historical times, like Daniel Defoe and so on and so forth. You know, Journal of the Plague Year, which I even started to read, and I had ideas that I would, you know, join in the internet world, do more events online, or a festival, do something interesting like that, you know, reading or something that I would just connect and so on. And but very, very quickly I was overtaken by that anxiety, which made everything so difficult. And what was really difficult was concentration. So if I had thought there'd be time to write, that was gone, because I mean, I was fortunate to keep my job. I was able to keep working, but I worked from home, and I found that internet work, on the internet, working from home, expanded the time. You know, it just filled the time. So I had less free time, and what time I had, I was quite tired from the computer. And then there's a total lack of concentration. And I was scrolling through the news and all these kind of things. I was checking Twitter, news feeds, all that stuff. And not before creativity. And what was happening was there's that complete lack of certainty what's going to happen next all the time. And I think that creativity comes from regularity and routine, and knowing what is going to happen next, that the next day you're going to sit down at your desk, have a few hours without things to distract you, basically. And there were too many distractions. I couldn't concentrate, and all those intentions went out the window. In terms of pandemic diary, I decided I would keep it, but as mentioned, it became an absolute chore. I was forcing myself to write that towards the end, and it's agonizing. And it went on for 6 months. I filled out about 300-400 pages of handwritten in this book, handwritten notes, but I was forcing myself to that page every day to write that at the end. Really would prefer not to have been doing it, but I determined to finish it. And then when I came to kind of editing it, I found that job, I can't begin to describe how tedious that was. It's like worse than reading a telephone directory. So I ended up distilling it into an essay about writing a diary, which is actually only very short, thank goodness.
I wonder, was the flaw in the form itself? Because people speak about, you know, this is a strange time, this is an extraordinary time. I have a thesis somewhere that it's not a time at all, that it's something other than time, and that if we're going to meet it with the diary, that we're immediately off on the wrong foot. That a diary is completely hobbled, as completely the wrong tool and implement to bring to this job.
Well, certainly there's no retrospection, and you know, one needs that distance to really write about something properly. I do feel it's important to have kept that document, but it's too soon to be doing anything with it, except perhaps writing in the abstract about the experience of writing it. But it's too soon to be looking at it. It's too raw. There's too much information which is unnecessary, for example. And I think a year from now, 2 years from now, we can look back and create about the time. But writing in the moment is too difficult, because we're still facing the same issues, for me, concentration and so on.
Do you mind talking about that, about the issue of concentration? Because it's a perennial issue with us writers, and it's one I've never solved. My own concentration fits and starts and blurts and everything like that. How did your deteriorating concentration, how did that manifest itself during this time?
In practical terms, I'd say 3 months went by when I couldn't write and I wasn't writing. And then because of the structure of my job, I was able to take the summer months away to work creatively. That was the plan. And I had those months without teaching work, you know, and I saw that time. It was the promised time being kind of seen at the very heart of the pandemic, oh, now you're going to be free from obligations, you can do creative tasks, actually was very difficult in reality, like lack of concentration. And what I did in practical terms, I began to edit work rather than create work. I began to edit older work. And that meant I was forcing myself to sit every day at the desk and do something. And it goes back to the fact that the creative part of writing for me is a very small part of a text, for example. It's that the impulse produces something, for a better word, of a draft. The actual writing comes in the rewriting, the editing, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I had some older drafts of older material. I began to edit those, and that was donkey work. I was doing that donkey work with that part of mind which didn't take much creativity or concentration. It was just putting things out, moving page, repasting them, crossing things out, advanced proofreading, all that kind of stuff. From that, I began to do a little bit of rewriting of older texts. And from that, I began to actually launch into new writing. And that was after maybe 5 months, since. So it's towards the middle or the end of summer that I finally began to do new work.
Okay. I'm going to come back to you on...
It was a painful process.
It was a painful process, everything about it. I'm going to come back to you on some of those themes, Arnold, but I want to move on to Marina. Hello, Marina. How are you?
Thanks.
Just unmuting myself.
Hi, Marina. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. That was so interesting listening to Arnold. I identified with so much of what he was saying.
Yeah, good. Do you want to start by reading a piece, Marina, and then we'll take it from there? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to read a little bit from towards the end of my book, Insomnia, which was published at the end of 2018, and it was a book that is kind of uncannily like the present time, which is that it was written into the anxiety of being a chronic insomniac. So I decided, rather than working against it, I would go with the grain of my anxiety and my ill-at-easeness. But then towards the end, I'm come to a kind of accommodation and acquaintance with darkness. And I thought this was the more optimistic part of the book, the end, the less enervated part. And so I thought I would read a little bit that was more calming about perhaps feeling comfortable with not knowing and with uncertainty and with darkness. The book's written in fragments, so I've edited a little as I read, and it's kind of quite incantatory. So that's the mode in which I'll read it. We are strangers to nocturnality much of the time, and not merely because we absent ourselves from night. We want to believe that natural magic and not the permissiveness of darkness strings spider webs across the bushes or leaves trails of slime on the window pane and mouse droppings on the sill, or fabricates mist suspended like wreaths across the sky, opaque and milky as frog spawn, but filmy enough when backlit by the moon so as to appear almost granular. And we are strangers to sleep as well, even those of us lucky enough to get it. We have an inkling of the work that sleep achieves: rest, repair, renewal, memory fixing, and the way it takes a sonar sounding of our unconscious minds. But because this work takes place invisibly, shrouded in darkness, while we ourselves, submerged beneath our own delta waves, trapped inside a deeper darkness of our own making, are unable to witness it, we can never fully apprehend its purpose. The ancients understood far better than we do the necessity of being alive to the mysteries of the dark in order to find enlightenment. The earliest Greek oracles were shrines to night. Ancient heroes who wished to see things for what they really were had to pass through underworlds, or they dwelt in caves. Sometimes, like Oedipus, they could see clearly or more deeply, which is to say with insight, only once they had been blinded. And let's not forget the seer, Phineas, who chooses blindness over sight. In each case, truth, not light, is the source of illumination for the darkened seer. In ancient Egypt, seekers after spiritual guidance could spend a night in incubation, which was a special institutionalized sleep undertaken in the temples of the gods. precisely in order to descry meaning in the dark. There these supplicants lay on consecrated ground like human lightning rods, hoping to receive messages and revelations that only the priests could interpret. When my child was small, her Canadian grandfather gave her a Cree Indian dream catcher, a spindly contraption made of thin twigs of willow, loosely braided into a hoop and hung with colourful feathers and beads and with rainbow threads crisscrossing here and there. It resembled a giant dangly earring. We pinned it to the shelf above her bed, hoping that it would catch good dreams and channel wonder and delight directly into her sleeping head. All these years later, when I walk into her bedroom and chance upon the dream catcher, I am moved by its talismanic qualities. Ritually, I touch the feathers, finger the cotton threads. I marvel that something so simple should channel the mysteries of the universe. Like the ancient Egyptians, the Cree Indians know that dream seeking is an art, because what you are really seeking is the understanding that lies on the other side of the dream. The dream is just the trafficker. There is something so peaceful about the dream catcher, its circular oneness, its effortless contiguity, that it seems an apt metaphor for the becalmed mind, a mind empty of worry, a darkened void across which tufts of feathery fluff or light-spun dust motes gently drift, signifying nothing. This image is the very opposite of the multi-pronged fidget spinner that comes to mind when I visualize the loud and boozy party train of senseless thought that careens across my own night-waking mind. Perhaps one of the lessons I can take from my insomnia is that its interest lies less in what it is that we see when we are wide awake at night, prickling with longing and with an innovating need to hunt down the truth, than in how we see. It's about paying attention to what lies at the peripheries of our being, or just across the border, or if we can bear to look, in the abyss, where Hesiod's origins and boundaries of everything are juxtaposed. When Freud wrote about the way the conscious and unconscious minds trade insights, he too was attempting to fathom this matter of how we see, exposing its mechanisms, but also the way that seeing by necessity incorporates blind spots. What Freud said is that during the day, we drive shafts into our fresh chains of thought, and these shafts make contact with dream thoughts. This is how day and night fertilize each other. This is how creativity is born.
Thank you, Marina. You used a lovely phrase there, the becalmed mind, which is very much at variance with what a lot of people have felt at the moment. Most of it is the fidget spinner mind a little bit at the moment. And we heard Arnold previously talk about anxiety. So it seems like that those are the becalmed is I think one of the words I would use to describe this whole epoch, this whole 8 months that has come upon us. But becalmed speaks of something peaceful and not quite, it means a purposeful stillness or at least a calm stillness in that. Has that been your experience, or has it been one of anxiety for you?
I've veered really between anxiety and a kind of paralytic stillness, anything but becalmed, the kind of stillness that's more like locked-in syndrome, where you're, I feel anyway, desperate to kind of burst out, but constrained both by the psychology of the situation, which Arnold described so well, I won't repeat. But also, it's so strange for a home worker. You know, it was the first time I ever felt constrained by being at home. Normally, it's my refuge. My study is a quiet, you know, productive space, but it felt like a prison in lockdown because it was a double lockdown. And I felt very envious of those writers who were deep into their projects because they had already got that momentum that drives you forward. And where I was in my own writing cycle, I was between projects and I wanted to start something else. And I felt that the mental constraints of the pandemic were very opposite to what I needed, which was that kind of avid, feeding, magpie-like state of excited fizz that you get when you're starting a new project.
You make a really interesting point there about how the pandemic and the lockdown kind of reconfigured your home life and you know, brought something unwelcome into your house in such a way that it wasn't just a workplace anymore. It turned your beautiful house and home into a prison, and that's quite a shocking and really unwelcome turn of events in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was that there was no other place than the house. So the house had to accommodate all your different aspects of activity and selfhood.
Previous to that, we would have been anxious to work from home.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened was that idea that work and anxiety, everything that was outside, chased us into our houses. So it wasn't like we were safe at home because we were staying at home, so we felt we could be kind of, you know, cozy and zen about it. It was all the uncertainty and anxiety and, you know, viral virulence that was outside chased us into our homes, and we were living with that indoors. That's a very difficult thing to ask people to do, and we were all doing it. But the irony, as Arnold pointed out in his diary, is how tedious that became. You know, very, very quickly, you know, there was that inward turn away from the news because the news became too much, and all that was left was a kind of, you know, a vacuum of tediousness. And I just didn't find that helpful.
You set up, you know, in order to contend with it and to make sense of it and to make use of the time, you set up a blog which had a kind of a global reach, and you sent a call out for work, and people contributed to it massively. And did you find that there was this homogeneity of experience out there, or that people were experiencing it very differently?
Both. So the homogeneity was more at the level of kind of the psychology of it, but the particularity of the differences, the different countries, whether people were in rurally based or in cities, whether they chose to write poems about the constrictions that they felt or the freedoms that they felt, for example, reacquainting themselves with nature, which a lot of people were writing about during lockdown. And it was really wonderful to have that connection, that horizontal connection across countries that was so lacking in actual imprisoned lockdown. The feeling that I could reach out to people, or they could reach out to me, and I could hear about their experiences in Berlin or Australia or Piedmonte or wherever it was that I got postcards from. And so that there, so I felt a real sense of kind of connection and purpose in doing that blog. And I spent 3 months doing this pop-up blog. And as time went on, I started editing it kind of lightly, not heavily, but lightly, because Dodo Inc. had said, well, why don't we put out an ebook? And then it became a passion project in a way, and something I was quite excited about, because I felt like there was a value to capturing what people were thinking and experiencing in real time before, when it was raw and unprocessed, when we were just kind of trying to make sense of it all. And it was a really enjoyable thing to do, I must say. And Arnold contributed a piece, and among 40 other writers.
Brilliant. I'm going to come back to you on some of that, Marina, and I'm going to move on to Doireann. How are you, Doireann? You there? Thank you, Marina.
I'm here. I'm still getting used to Zoom. You'd think I'd be used to it at this stage, Mike.
No, you're fine. How are you?
Good,
Doireann,
thanks.
Good, great to have you. Thank you for being here. Doireann, will you read something for us?
I will, absolutely, I will. Seeing as we have a captive audience here, I love nothing more than to inflict some poems on people when there's no escape. So I've chosen 4 little poems to read for you all this evening, and you're stuck with it now, you have to listen. The first one, I chose, given that our encounter tonight is occurring on screens and that I'm so far from all of you, which saddens me really, like I wish we could be doing this in person and that I could see all of your very beautiful faces out there. So I'm going to begin with a poem that occurs in screens in a world like the world we're in now of flimsy connections, and it's called Gléoch. Ní cheang líon ein chóir de quail, ein shrang telephone sin ní smó. I réim sin a riverí, ní higlam do gho a bhrú níos cuire go mo chluas. Ní chluisim tú ag anáú. Inis sé an lína lag seo an tain cheangal a bháin atá fáca adrin, agus titmuid as a chéile, a ríis is a ríist eile. Call. No slender thread, no telephone cord binds us anymore. Now that our computers call each other, I can't press your voice to my ear. No longer can I hear you breathe. Now we are bound only by this weak connection, and we break up and break up and break up. The next poem I chose, given our theme of creativity, I thought I'd share a favorite poem by you, a poem with you all that addresses the kind of wrench and the joy, and I suppose how perplexing sometimes a life in creativity can be, especially at times like this. So this poem is by Michael Hartnett, who's a very important poet in my world. And Winked Drolini. I mo bhúcail óg fadó, daim sios nead. Bhí na gearcaig clúfa, fásta, siad ag scrad. Dairig siad is hurling a ríis mocht, armsa bhí muinke clúf sa bhón fleoch. Níor ghuine mé, ach géig crín, nó cairn cloch, ach bhí iontas crua nar bhreisiad ag búla faoi mocht. Bín an lár hurling ceirt a élín ómós, the dog na ningne farba arum, nar laisú fós. A necklace of wrens. When I was very young, I found a nest. Its chirping young were fully fledged. They rose and realighted around my neck, made in the wet meadow a feather necklet. To them, I was not human, but a stone or tree. I felt a sharp wonder they could not feel. That was when the craft came which demands respect. Their talons left on me scars, not healed yet. I grew up in County Clare and I still feel like I belong there, and I've been living in Cork now for like more than 20 years, and I thought I knew homesickness before, but since the arrival of this pandemic, it really deepened that constant sensation I carry around me, to kind of an ache. Really miss home. I really, really miss it. So I'm going to read a short poem now that occurs under Clare, and it's from my next book, and the poem is called A Snippet 5.6 seconds long of a subterranean waterfall. So fast, this child learns to scroll and swipe. When he finds my phone, he hides, sliding past his own old eyes until he reaches his favorite clip. I'll wee again. There it is. The cave, the same old darkness. The waterfall lit by a dozen flashes, which he watches, as we did, transfixed. Every time he touches it, it spills again to his fingertip, obedient and quick. Again he presses play, And again the dark wakes, filling the screen with falling amber flames. He stares, and we stare at his face, how it reflects that past, even as it turns away. Luminous, luminous, and suddenly strange. I'll end with a final poem by another favourite poet, an American called Ruth Stone, which has often been of deep reassurance to me, especially during this pandemic. So I wanted to share it with all of you in the hopes that it might be of some reassurance to all of you as well. It's called Train Ride. This book, it's a collected. Train Ride. All things come to an end. Small calves in Arkansas, the bend of the muddy river. Do all things come to an end? No, they go on forever. They go on forever. The swamp, the vine-choked cypress, the oaks rattling last year's leaves, the thump of the rails, the kite, the still white stilted heron. All things come to an end. The red clay bank, the spread hawk, the bodies riding this train, the stalled truck, pale sunlight, the talk goes on forever. The wide, dry field of geese, a man stopped near his porch to watch. Release, release, between cold death and the fever, send what you will, I will listen. All things come to an end. No, they go on forever. Shin Shin.
Thanks, Darren. That was lovely.
Okay, Mike.
I haven't heard. In all of my time listening to poetry readings, I haven't heard a poet split their time between their own work and someone else's work. Is poetry a source of solace, a source of comfort and solace in this moment?
It is definitely for me, and I was going to say that's what you get for inviting a total bookworm to read some work. Yeah, no, I draw such comfort and reassurance from returning to individual poems and to books as well, books of poetry. I mark, I don't know if you can see there, I mark so many pages of my books. They're a disgrace. They're all dog-eared, underlined and everything. So when I return to a book and I'm feeling in a certain way, I can immediately find the poems that spoke to me last time, and it just feels like having a key to just unlock something in yourself. So yeah, poetry is a great source of solace for me.
When I was putting my thoughts together for this event this evening, I was thinking, looking and thinking that you are the one that writes across two different genres and two different languages and that. And I was wondering, does poetry present itself in this moment, or does prose present itself in this moment? Or is it fertile ground for one or the other, or both?
I think for me, both, but I suppose my artistic development has been such that I've had to be quite sharp and ruthless in how I approach every day in terms of trying to find little spots that I can turn to writing. And so with the pandemic, it felt quite familiar to me. It felt a little bit like those exhausting days where you have a newborn in the house or several small children, and you're kind of going around in a bit of a whirl, and you're dealing with exhaustion and the fractured nature of the way that days are. And this felt a little like that to me, the sense of being slightly unmoored, the sense of being fretful a lot of the time and unsure. That's how things felt to me very much at the start, and because I was familiar with that sensation artistically, I suppose it kind of stood to me, Mike, that you know, I'm used to being able to find a little minute for myself, and even if it's only enough time to get a sentence that I'm happy with, well, my standards are low, you know, that's enough to make me feel like I've done a day's work.
Yeah. You outlined the reason for that. You have to navigate among, you know, domesticity is one of your themes, and you have to navigate through all the chores and timetables of that and everything.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing at the very start of this was like a lot of people, I suppose I was quite low at the very start of it, because it was a fright for all of us, wasn't it, really, at the very start. And I very quickly kind of went into a bit of a spiral, in that, like, the book that I had, A Ghost in the Throat, that was due to be published, suddenly wasn't going to be published. And my publishers were spectacular and so reassuring, and they were saying, you know, it's grand, we've got this date, we'll publish it in August. But everything felt so uncertain that I kind of, some part of me felt like, no, that's it, that book is, this was the story of that book. This book ended up being something I worked on really hard for years, and then the pandemic came. So that was very, even though it wasn't realistic, that was very hard to get my head around. And I felt like I'd lost my job, you know, and I'd lost my purpose a little bit. Like, I was asking myself questions at the very start, like, you know, you've devoted your life to trying to teach yourself to become a writer, and this is how quickly it can evaporate. You know, I was down with a rubber at my calendar, all the events that were penciled in, all the plans gone, like gone. And there was a poem, again, by an American poet called Doireann Ní Ghríofa, who, she was born in 1903, that I came across. I had kind of set myself, like I often do, the challenge of attending to a writer's whole body of work. And so I had her collected poems. And there was one of her poems that kind of took me by the shoulders and shook sense into me. And it's called Poet's Work. Wait till you hear this now. It's teeny tiny. Grandfather advised me, learn a trade. I learned to sit at desk and condense. No layoff from this condensery. Now, there's no arguing with that, is there? Like, I mean, that's it. That's it. No layoff from this condensery. My job is to sit here and whittle and whittle and whittle away. I can't go running off like that. So from that day forwards, I said to myself, no, keep working, keep at it. And a lot of days were very hard. And then other days I felt like I'd get half a line or something, like I say. And that was of great solace to me, that I could feel like, I often feel during the pandemic, like I'm like a squirrel, you know. I'm just going out and I'm trying to find the odd little hazelnut. I'll put it aside. And even though times are hard for all of us at the moment, I feel like look, it's not for nothing. I've got this little handful of nuts that I've gathered, and you know, that'll nourish me now through the winter, I hope. But it is hard, Mike, and it's very lonesome.
Yeah, it is. Actually, that's one of the themes that are, and I'm going to go around to each of them, but I'll ask you this. One writer commented to me that he said, I didn't think I needed. He said I thought social isolation was the default place for a writer. But he said when the opportunity of casual meetings and coffees and encounters was taken away from me, he says, I missed it. He says, I missed it hugely. And he was surprised at the how lonesome he was, actually.
Yeah, I think for me, I can hear where he's coming from in that, but I just don't really get out so much. So I didn't have that kind of sense of the social life or of comrades, apart from my good friend Sarah. But yeah, no, I wouldn't have had that. But what I do miss very much, like, is saying poems to a room full of people. That became very precious to me over the past few years. I loved it. I think as adults, we really get the chance to sit down. Like, I've had the pleasure of sitting down and listening to Arnold read now and listening to Marina read, and you just get kind of carried away in yourself. And I miss that, you know, more than anything. I miss that, of being able to, you know, tell a story or say a poem to people. And I think that's in us as Irish people anyway, you know. We want to go on court. We want to, we want it, you know.
Yeah, the whole enchanted thing was very, very noticeable in you when you were reading. You were gone in those poems when you were reading there. It was lovely to witness. Marina, did you miss the whole did you miss the whole human interaction thing? We're confined to our screens. It doesn't suit us. Does it wear you out?
Yeah, I desperately missed the human interaction aspect. I desperately missed physicality, you know, not being able to hug people, not being able to touch people. That dance of physical distancing I found really awful. I still do, actually, you know, that hopping into the road because you're going to pass someone closer than 2 meters on the pavement. I mean, I live in the city, so encounters like that, the impoverishment of and the forbiddenness of those encounters hits me every day.
Yeah, some people have, a person commented to me yesterday that we're, even when we're on screen like this, and it's great to be talking like this, but we are uncannily, we are in the presence of your absence, and that's kind of, it's existentially and ontologically really awkward, and it doesn't sit well with our soul. And I think we can put up with it for a while, but how long before it starts taking a toll on us?
Yeah, there's a kind of, it's a flattening of life experience, and I don't think that's helpful to writers, because I think writers want an overload of stimulation in order to do the job of whittling and thinking and mulling, and you know, that balance between input and output, that tension that's so essential, was all askew. So I found that very difficult. I mean, I don't know how the others felt, but one of the things that I did find joyful about lockdown was reading. And also the solace of poetry, reading more poetry and just reading more generally, because I had more time to do it in, was nice.
Arnold, I saw you nodding your head there when she was talking about reading. Was it a source of comfort?
Absolutely. I was smiling because we're talking about solitude and lonesomeness and loneliness and so on. And I have a very good friend, and he made a comment about the type of person he is, and it's the same kind of person I am, that I get my energy from being on my own. And you know, some people get their energy from other people. I actually get my energy from solitude and so on. But when it's enforced, then you're into the area of loneliness, and it's slightly different, you know. And I remember after the first lockdown, meeting a friend for a walk, and it was the first time in months I had met someone. Yeah, I'm with my wife here, but apart from my wife, was the only person I was seeing for all that time. I got to see a friend finally, and I was talking like a mile a minute. I was just euphoric. And I thought, you know, with someone with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder as I have, which I've written about, you know, one of the things is pressure of speech is the symptom of going manic. And I was definitely having this pressure of speech. I thought, oh God, I hope no one sees me now. They think I'm crazy. But I just was like absolutely released after months, you know. And it still happens now. It's because I'm in a small town. I don't get to see my friends. I do meet someone in the flesh. I find I'm just yapping away. It's great. Talk. Because we just miss, as Marina's saying, the true intimacy of being with people in the flesh, as opposed to on the screen, as you're saying, Mike, which is not the same, you know. And I hate the end of these type of screen interactions where one's left with one's other tabs, the Twitter feed, the latest news headlines from, you know, whatever's going on and so on, and still kind of popping up, you know, oh, you've got some email which you've neglected, and now here it is again, kind of thing, to remind you. There's none of that natural departure, you know. That's very hard as well.
Well, a question, folks, just a reminder that please put some questions into the chat box there on the side. We welcome them, and that one has come through there. And Arnold, while I have you, is this a time of waiting? Is this a time of, is it a time in itself, or is it a time preparatory to some other time, something like that? And that's what gives it this anxiety. That's what gives it this kind of, we don't know what it is. It gives it this a kind of a unique pressure.
I think the pressure, and again, I've had conversations with a good friend of mine about this, is just we don't have any agency anymore in our lives. We just don't know what's happening next. I do kind of reflect towards the end of my diary essay that the only certainty is this lack of certainty. And it's this loop. We're in this kind of loop of endless. Then we get to a beginning and a middle with no catharsis or end. Then we go loop back to the beginning again. And then we're in the back in the middle. Okay. And and that's a complete lack of. The only certainty is we don't know when it's going to end. So we can't feel like it's a pause. Normally, when there's a pause, if it's a break or holiday or we do know we're accepting this is a pause that we're going to stop and it'll resume. We will resume some other time, but we don't know when we're going to resume. And that's a cause of, for me, distress and anxiety. And it's this not being in control of that pause. It's being imposed upon us. So it doesn't feel like a nice positive pause at all.
No. Well, let's see what sort of shape it takes on. Marina, I have a question here that has the pandemic changed how you think about writing for yourself versus writing for an audience? You spoke to you had the theme of insomnia, and all of a sudden you found that you had a massive audience. You thought there was a time in your life when you were exploring the theme of insomnia, you feared you were alone, and all of a sudden you had a massive audience on that. And has this changed? Has this pandemic changed anything like that in your interaction with your blog and everything like that? Your microphone, Marina.
Sorry.
Yeah,
it's funny, the time lag in a way, because I was writing Insomnia 2.5 years ago, and I felt that anxiety was a subject that people were only just beginning to write about acute anxiety and its effects. There were some academic books, there were some memoirs that came out. And then we entered this incredibly bizarre political reality, I think, where politics became subject to the whims of anxiety as well, and became, there was no truth anymore. There was kind of fake news. There was this incredible sense of the unexpected happening, and uncertainty became the order of the day, and unpredictability was the norm. And I think anxiety then infused culture in general. And then, of course, the pandemic hits, which throws us all into this kind of fretful, to use a word that Doireann used earlier, fretful state of kind of gnawing at our own selves. Very rat-like, unproductive, circular, tedious, all those words that have come up this evening. I think it's very hard to write your way out of it. I loved Doireann's idea of the squirrel harvesting nuts and secreting them away for sustenance. I wish I'd found some hazelnuts of my own, but I guess the blog was the closest I came to kind of shrugging off that feeling of panic, because by connecting with other people who are feeling similarly unmoored and unhappy and uncertain, I think there was a comfort in that, actually. And it's very strange, this whole idea of going into lockdown too, and the strange things that it's doing to time, because I don't think it feels like we're coming to the end of a year with those ritual markers of Christmas and family and so on. We're not. We're just in this sagging, baggy, uncertain middle all over again. And that roll round into 2021 just feels like, oh, we're going to get more of the same. It's going to be the same. So the leavening of life, the vicissitudes, its shapes, it's all gone. And I think writers like those things. They like to grasp hold of rhythms and write into them and with them and against them. And we've got nothing but mulch. So I'm sorry, I feel like I'm hitting a very doomy note, but that's sort of what it feels like for me right now.
Maybe appropriately gloomy. No, I mean, you've.
Looks like we might have lost. Well, we lost you there for a moment, Mike, but yeah, so you might resume what you were saying a moment ago.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? You can, yeah. How you doing? Just after realizing Gléach by Doireann was written a long time ago, Doireann, how does it feel to have written something which relates so painfully, but also so beautifully to the times we're living in?
I suppose at the point, well, to tell you the truth, at the point where I composed that poem, or I really feel like at the point that that poem came to me, because that's truer to how the process feels, you know, that they come to you. A lot of people of my generation had been forced to emigrate for economic reasons, and I would bump into their parents, my parents' age, in the supermarket, and I'd be there with a trolley full of small children, and they would just come over and they were just so drawn. And so many of them had grandchildren who are now living in Australia or Abu Dhabi, and you know, they'd be there putting, this is long before coronavirus, but you know, trying to give them 20 cents, or you know, the way people always do that. And they would always say as part of the conversation, but your Skype is great, you know, and it was always Skype. It was always Skype is great. So it was even like before we would have been FaceTiming or anything like this. And I just felt so sad for them, because when we were growing up, and the big old landlines at home, you know, you'd hold it to your ear, someone would ring you, even a pal or something, you'd be able to hear them breathing. And there's something so intimate about that, in the gaps between speech where someone is thinking and you're there with them, even though they're not in the room with you, but they feel physically present in some way. And there's a literal connection with the wire, isn't there? You know, there's that cord. And I felt, I just felt as though something had fallen away between us. That, you know, they would say Skype is great, and it would be great because they could see the faces of their grandchildren and their children, but that there was also something lost. So it does feel a bit strange that now suddenly that poem is even more relevant. Like, I ring my own parents every evening now in Clare. And unfortunately we've had a lot of illness in our own family this year, and a lot of difficult circumstances. Every single night my parents talk to their grandchildren now. So I kind of wonder whether with that poem I brought this on us, you know, because now they're in that situation where they're only a few hours drive away, but you know, we haven't seen them now in months, and it's hard, I think, but yeah, sure, you know, WhatsApp is great.
A question to Arnold and Marina, because both of you touched on it. You both revisited old work, and both did it in a kind of an editorial fashion, and that. And Arnold, what was it like renewing old work again? What was it like meeting old work? Did you go, oh, Jesus, who wrote that, or was it in some way energizing? Or,
well, this year what I was working on, I was editing an essay I wrote earlier in the year and just had finished in March, I remember, and it was a memoir. So it was still relevant. It's set in the past. And then the next thing I did when I got back to the editing of the other new work, which was on hold until I got to the editing stage, that stage I said at the middle to the end of summer. What I was doing then was fiction, short stories. And I have a style of writing short stories, which is they're slightly timeless and placeless sometimes. You know, sometimes they're specific places set in the past, but quite often they're kind of abstract, you know, like kind of, I was working on a novella where a character who's nameless kind of goes to a nameless city kind of thing, you know. So I didn't feel that they weren't relevant because they weren't rooted completely right now. I didn't have to update and suddenly have, you know, people put on masks or putting on sanitizers and being in lockdown just to make it suddenly of the moment. And I think there was this kind of conversation going around in the media earlier in the lockdown. Do all the writers have to now insert all these things to make the writing relevant? The way I was writing and the work I was editing, it still seemed to stand up, and you know, if it sees the light of day in publications, I think it'll still be it'll work because the stories are specific are in the past, and the abstract stories are in these kind of placeless, timeless places, you know. So I was happy enough with that. But, you know, sometime, you know, I might be writing new work again, like fiction, and in this time, and then I'll have to address, how do I write about this time in fiction? You know, I've got the diary and the essay about this time, but what's it going to be like 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, or 10 years from now, to write a story set in spring or summer of 2020? And, you know, do you put all these details in? You know, because when you read sort of Agatha Christie, for example, just plucking out of the air, she doesn't say, oh, I picked up the bakelite object on the corner of the hall and dialed the circular. It's just, I picked up the phone. And we have to imagine what a bakelite phone looked like in her head, because for her it's normal. So 10 years from now, when we talk about going to the shops in summer of 2020, do we talk about the queues and the masks and the hand sanitizer and the so on and so forth, or not? Or is it just specific things we're talking about? You know, do you want to write a story about instance of COVID rage, or will that become just something, you know, it's like wearing hats and gloves or smoking in the 50s. You don't get it mentioned that often in the books, but it's there, you know. So these kind of things do occur to me, but it hasn't affected me in my writing so far. If that answers that question.
Marina, how did you encounter your old work? Did it? You mentioned going back to some old work that you were editing in that. I can't hear you, Marina.
Sorry, when I'm in between projects, I often go back to old files where I've got, you know, my various ideas where I've started projects but haven't finished them, or I've filed away notes on things, and I try and see if I can flog one of those dead things back into life. So, but I edit other people's work all the time, as a matter of course, for Eon. So I'm always working with words, even when I'm not writing my own stuff. But I mean, for this year, for me to have coincided with the pandemic felt like a double eviction, really. Eviction from my own self, and my eviction from my own work, and an eviction from my normal reality. And my instinct now in the new work that I've just started, which, as I said at the beginning, you know, it's the great relief that I feel like I've got some traction with something. Ignores COVID completely. It's just not, although it's set in the now, it's just, I'm not interested in COVID. I'm actually interested in kind of hate, internecine hate, neighborly hate. I'm interested in those feelings of hate. So I guess it's chiming with this political moment that we're living in, and ignoring the pandemic, but it is still of the now.
Yeah.
But just not of this bit, which I found so paralyzing and difficult. And I don't want to have to think about COVID now. I mean, I'd be very interested actually in a few years' time to see what novelists make of it. And there was a lot of complaint in the media about how little novelists had actually written about the Spanish flu at the time, and how hard it was to find references to the Spanish flu. So in a way, is the question, do novelists have an obligation, or all writers, do we have an obligation to be specific about it, so that if we do have a future, those of us who are inhabiting it, you know, can get a sense of what we went through and how we dealt with it, and maybe they'll be in a pandemic of their own looking back at us. Gosh, everything I'm saying this evening sounds so gloomy.
No, you're on fire, Marina. Don't worry about it one bit. No, but I am going to go around to the three of you, because our theme, our heading here was creativity and well-being, and possibly we haven't spoken enough about well-being. So I'm going to start with Doireann, because Doireann, the very first contact I had with you today, Doireann, was you texted me a photograph of a beautiful forest walk that you were on at that time, and it was full of golden brown autumn colors, and you could almost smell it. It was so vivid in that. So walking has become one of the things you've put into your life in this pandemic.
Yeah, that's the way I spam all my friends, just sending them pictures of smelly old forests by text all the time. Yeah, no, I suppose I would have had a very sedentary lifestyle pretty much all my life. And definitely since I became a writer, which only, like, I mean, I was very late to writing. I only started to write in my late 20s. So I got in the habit of being quite ruthless and using every single spare minute I could find for writing, as I was speaking about earlier. And what I found suddenly with the pandemic was that the 6 of us here in our family sharing a home, and our days changed, and suddenly it became really important for me to have time where I was outside and moving on my own with my headphones in, and no one was pulling and dragging out of me. And I just, like, I was talking to one of the moms at school the other day about this, and she was the same way. And it doesn't sound very pleasant when you phrase it like this, but for better or worse, it is kind of what it is, that there was the sense of like running as fast and as far as you could away from the house and all your responsibilities. And I kind of felt like it's okay as long as I turn around and run back afterwards, isn't it? Just that that was the kind of like sudden instinct that was there, and that was really what I clung to. That not that I turned away from writing, because writing became more precious and more beloved to me than ever, and I've been writing throughout this, and it's become really even more important, if anything. But that suddenly there was this other thing that was important, and the only place I could go when we were in the level of lockdown, where we were only allowed 3 kilometers from our house, was an old, well, it's a new graveyard at the very top of the hill. So I'd bomb it up there and go round and round and round the graveyard until I had to turn around and come back. And it's amazing when you attend to a place like that and revisit it on a daily basis over months, what it will reveal of itself. Like, I found one evening when I was there that when the sun is starting to dip down there, the backs of all the new gravestones that are there, all polished marble, they all gleam really bright gold. So like for a few minutes in that new graveyard, there's never anyone there except myself, you know. It's kind of, it's not a, you know, it's not a sad place, it's a very peaceful place. But you could be there for a few minutes and suddenly you're just surrounded by all these bright gold mirrors, you know. So there was lovely and strange moments like that daily habit brought me, and that's something I've really held on to, you know. Like even this morning when I was in the middle of my 5K, which I never would have realized in a million years that I would ever attempt, let alone be doing it several times a week. But it's something that brings me pleasure now. So I don't know, make of that what you will. I feel I'm taking a lot of positive things from this time, but I do want to say, especially with respect to the other experiences that are being articulated, you know, I was exposed to Pollyanna very young in life, and it ruined me for my whole life. You know, in Pollyanna, there's the thing called the glad game, where no matter what horrible situation you're in, you're like, what can I be glad about? It absolutely destroyed me for the rest of my life. And now I'm just constantly playing the glad game. I'm extremely annoying to be around for any length of time. So that's me playing the glad game.
No, Arnold, what did you put? Have you put any protocols or any hobbies or new skills in place during this lockdown, during this time of pandemic?
I just remembered, well, I want to continue on Doireann's theme of walking, but I just remembered I did do one thing creative at the very start when I wasn't doing any writing or editing or anything at all, just completely knocked for six. And then I created a zine. Do you know what a zine is?
Yeah,
kind of tiny little kind of hand generated, well, on the printer and all that kind of stuff, but like little tiny zine. For the writer Joanna Walsh, who's doing a project curating zines from around the world through her Twitter account, and I got slightly obsessed with the zine. It took a lot of hours on the laptop and the printer, and getting paper and cutting it out and fold it a certain way. You have to look up designs online, there's a very clever pattern that you do. You fold it and cut in a certain way, and then you post the zine to her, and it's this Twitter account, and she tweets about it and so on and so forth. There's going to be an exhibition someday, I believe. So Zines in Dark Times, I think, is the Twitter, if I remember rightly. So I was doing that, and I was that was a tiny bit of writing, a bit of text in that. That was about the only creative writing I did. And I just remembered, as Doireann was talking before the pandemic, I mean, I do experience anxiety quite a lot, and what I use to alleviate that is walking a lot of the time. And I was walking anyway as just part of just my life. It's a huge part of my life is walking. I love walking, but I would say I have become quite obsessed with walking since lockdown, because there's not much else to do. The pool is closed, the swimming pool is closed, can't get to the sea to swim the sea in the summer, you know. And in terms of physical activity, walking is the easiest and most pleasurable, and I'm very, very fortunate. And I would say there's moments of grace, and one of them is the fact I live near a very nice forest. It's 10-minute, 15-minute walk. That's 2K, I guess. So it's an historic forest, 16th century wooded, you know, oak wooded forest. And I can walk around there from door to door and do a loop in an hour. And invariably, if my stomach is tight and my chest is constricted, when I walk into the center of these woods and the trees are soaring, something in me soars and my stomach relaxes and my chest soars, and I just, it's extraordinary. And I began, so as I mentioned before the pandemic, you know, unfortunately, I suffer from anxiety on and off, and I would walk, and I wrote an essay for an anthology coming out next year, and it's about the benefits of walking for anxiety. So I started reading and researching. There's a lot of research out there, various books and so on, and then been building up a library of books connecting walking, just about walking, the culture of walking, history of walking. So I've become a bit of a obsessive, but the current person I'm quite interested in is Rousseau, and I have a little quote above my computer, and I just plugged it down there. It is on my walks among the rocks and trees that I compose in my head. So I do find a connection between walking and creativity as well. It does help me generate ideas. Always kind of like that old cliche, where do you get your ideas? It's more like, how do I get my ideas? It's from walking, and I absolutely love it. So that's one thing. But new skill. Oh, the other thing, a lot of cooking, actually, Mike. I for the first time I've made chutney and jam. So that's another thing. I resisted the sourdough baking fashion, though. I became a little bit more esoteric and made chutney. So there you go. Green tomato chutney.
Marina, what did you put in your life that keeps you on an even keel during this time?
More poetry. I put poetry back in my life, which is
the reading of it and the writing.
The reading of it.
You didn't cast your hand at writing it?
No, I've never done that. Although I kind of, you know, the more I read poetry, the more it kind of intrudes on my, in a good way, invades my nonfiction. So I like to write lyrically, I guess. So it's a fruitful area for me in all sorts of ways, reading poetry. And I like the concision of it. I like the economy of it. And I like nonfiction that kind of leans into poetry. I've also really enjoyed spending time with family. We're a small family of 3, and we've enjoyed each other's company, and we've all found our little ways of, you know, of spending the time engagingly. So whether it's making art or bread or music, that's what happens, and it's nice. It's nice to have that time.
See, Marina, you did get to say the nice things at
Yeah.
the end. I'm going to leave it there, folks. Thank you so much. That was so generous and so kind and insightful. It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Doireann. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you, Marina. Best of luck with your own work from now on, and I hope we meet again when meet properly face to face in the real world when this season has passed over us. And that, to all of you people online who stayed with us for this hour and a quarter, and that, thank you very much. Good night, and God bless, and take care of yourself. Thank you.